And there it is, the purple owl's clover. This is usually classified in the snapdragon family, and as you can see, those flowers are really interesting. It's got quite an interesting personality. So, older texts will classify this differently. The classification has been changed, and that might be some cause for confusion. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, that looks a bit like a flower that you might know as Indian paintbrush, it's commonly referred to as. And you find those in reds and orange hues often. And actually, this has another common name that it's known as, which is the excerted Indian paintbrush. It's also known as escobita. It is classified scientifically, however, in the genus Orthocarpus. Older texts actually classify it in the genus of Castilleja, but it is now known in the snapdragon family, again, formerly put in the figwort family, so it's been moved around a bit. And I'm not surprised at that. It's just a really interesting flower with a lot going on. Like I said, I see it as really a clover snapdragon crossover. So you'll notice the flowers have the typical snapdragon look to them, and that's their irregular flowers with the two lips. So you kind of see the top and the bottom lips on those flowers. Very cool. It's actually one of my favorites. There's a lot of color here too, and so you'll find that too. Some people think it's more pinkish, reddish, or purplish, so it might even be classified differently. If you have a guidebook or something, it's to me, it's primarily fuchsia, but then on top of it, you see that it has yellow. You'll see yellow flowers in there as well. Sometimes they're a little on the whitish side, as these ones down here are orangish, and we have red tones. So lots of color going on in this owl's clover. So if we look closely here at the flowers, here you can see that snapdragon typical flower, like I mentioned, with the two lips, the upper and the lower portions of the flower. So this guy here is maybe 4 inches or so tall, but they can get up to 16 to maybe even 18 inches tall, and you can find them in these single flowers like I have here, but you can also find these growing in massive clusters if it's the right area. The leaves are not going to be anything too showy. These are sort of just long, maybe you could say ferny-like leaves, but they're really not, especially on this plant, they're really just not a big showy leaf at all. And a lot of them here are close to basil on this particular plant. Portions of the stem and leaves are somewhat hairy. Now these guys bloom about March to May. Typically late March to early April is a really good time to find blossoms of these, and more particularly when it has been a really wet winter, that's when you can find these dense clusters like we have this year. It's been a really wet winter, and right here I can find a lot of different single flowers, but up on the hills here, the rocky hills around me, there are really dense stands of these. Some plants can have a single floral cluster like you see on this one at the top, but there are others that actually branch out, like this guy. This is actually one plant with several branching components to it, kind of a central group of flowers there with branches of other ones on it. Their seeds are actually stored by insects like harvester ants, and so they'll store them in the ground where they'll stay dormant for years, possibly. And they basically wait for a winter of really good rain. And as I mentioned, we just had one of those. And so we're seeing a lot of these owl's clover all over the place. So they'll be pretty widespread after a good rain season. These are especially common in the Organ Pipe National Monument, but you can actually find them around Arizona. Now, they typically grow, they're very common in southwest Arizona in elevations of anywhere from like 1,500 to 4,500 feet. So down in the desert scrub, up the slopes into the grassland regions even. And so you'll find them in all of those different environments, and they're typically growing like this around some other wildflowers. These guys are under a branching cholla next to a creosote bush. They're very common in creosote bush communities. Open flat areas like you see here they'll grow in, as well as up on flat areas along the hillsides. And they commonly grow with these other flowers. What we see here today are bladder pods. So they're commonly growing with bladder pods. We also see lupine here. That's a pretty common flower that they'll be with. I do see some globe mallows and other things here as well, and some scorpion weed. And they might even also be growing with poppies. There are some poppies here. There's a little one right there. But there's also some poppies around. Now, it's not just a coincidence. It turns out the owl's clover is a semi-parasitic, or sometimes referred to as hemiparasitic plant. And what that means is this cute little guy actually takes nutrients from other flowers in the area. So it will take water and nutrients via the roots, and it actually will make its own food supply on its own, but it uses those nutrients for benefit and then produces, like a green plant does, it produces sugars. It will grow on many different roots versus being specific, like we might think of mistletoe. You can see mistletoe up in that tree. That's an ironwood. Mistletoe can be very specific and will grow on specific trees like juniper, or there are other mistletoes that grow on mesquites. But again, the owl's clover is not as specific. It will attach to the roots of lots of different wildflowers. But having said that, it does benefit from particular ones. So if it finds an area where it's connected to more beneficial plants, it will grow in more abundance. If it's on a good host, it will flower earlier. These ones are flowering in March here. And it will produce more seeds.